This is O'Connor back again. Yes, back in my office looking at PhDs. Guess what? We love PhDs, us academics, and especially when you look at that, like 600-page PhD, like this is a beautiful one, this one. And you look, you flick through here and you're thinking, wow, 30 pages of theory framework. And you're thinking, my gosh, theory. If I want to do a PhD, I need to know theory. Theory is so boring. How can theory relate to day-to-day life? Like, life is so complicated. Why do we have to bring theory into all of this? And so the big question is, I've been asked by a lot of PhD students, what is theory and why is theory important? And, you know, look, 600 pages. Man, theory. So I just want to say a few things about theory and why it is important. It is very, very critical. But when you listen to the next minute or two where I talk about theory, you'll get a better understanding that theory can help you a lot. So what is theory? Theory is basically a logic of someone's behavior. It's a logic of some cause and effect that occurs in society. And so that cause and effect can be mechanical. So we talk about accounting theory that relates debits and credits. So it's very mechanical. Or it can be very psychological or behavioral, where people's behavior are predicted to go in some way facing a certain circumstance. So, you know, so we talk about a theory of behavior, a theory of accounting. And so a theory is kind of a logic of prediction, to how we can predict the world to be given a certain set of circumstances. So how does that help you as a PhD student or as a master's student or an honours student? Like, you know, we don't want to push too much theory onto honours student. I've already said something about that in another video. But what is theory? Okay, so it's assumptions of behavior. It's a logic. So how does it help you in your writing? Well, it helps you in getting an outline of your writing. Let me give you an example. Here's a project I've been working on, and it's about scams. So I looked at limiting supplier opportunism, evidence from buyer complaints. And I'm thinking, so what theory can we have here? And so we would have an outline, well, a 3-paragraph outline. The first paragraph would be, well, in this world, this multinational world, we have this challenge for multinationals to either make or buy. What do we mean? Should they make everything themselves? In other words, they send subsidiaries all around the world to actually control everything through direct ownership, or should they buy things? In other words, have a sophisticated supply chain like what Apple does, and then you actually contract with individual suppliers. That's a make versus buy type approach. And that, in some ways, is a kind of a simple theory of multinational behavior. When a company gets big, in order to solve a problem, does it make something to solve the problem, or does it buy in the problem? Does it acquire a problem? And so what we did was, okay, if multinationals are going to make their own products or components, then they may make them in China, they may make them in another developing country. But when they make them, and it's going to be cheaper because they're in a developing country, they're going to face xenophobic risks. That is, the risks of being a foreigner in another country. And if some unrest occurs in that country, then they may be targeted and their shops may be firebombed or something like that. And that's happened in China, it's happened in other countries. All right, so that's the cost of having that ownership in another country. And so you've got that control, but then you've got cost of xenophobic risks. So what about buying? That is, you manage a supply chain. So that's the other way. So let's manage a supply chain so no one knows that me, Mr. multinational, maybe Apple, Microsoft or whatever, is actually part of that supplier network, and the supplier is making components for me. People will not attack that supplier if they want to attack me, my brand name, because I've done something wrong, or they hate me because I come from a particular country. All right, so there's a way of making, so then I save that problem If I buy from a supplier, I save that problem of a xenophobic risk. My foreignness is not out there in the world. However, those suppliers may cheat me. Those suppliers may say that the components are more expensive than what I should pay. And so therefore, there are costs and benefits of making. There's costs and benefits of supplying, that is outsourcing that production. And then that's a kind of theory that we can start with. Then we can go to the next stage of, okay, we've got these buyer complaints of scams, and then what we write in the second paragraph is something like, well, in this setting of where you get scammed as a buyer, maybe there are two different levels of problems here. There's a problem at the multinational level. They can just throw a heap of lawyers at that problem and solve it like a simple supply chain problem. That is, you lawyer up and actually you contract up and make sure the suppliers don't do the wrong thing, and the lawyers monitor the adherence to contracts. But then there's a small side of that equation where you are a small buyer, and so you don't face xenophobic risks, but you're going into the world and sourcing from overseas, like selling on Amazon. So now you face a problem that you're a small buyer, but you cannot lawyer up. You cannot lawyer up and actually go and make the suppliers do what they should do in their contract. You cannot lawyer up because you're a small buyer. So therefore we have a setting of buyer complaints and scams affecting not multinationals, but it's affecting the small buyer situation. So how does the theory change then? Well, the small buyer situation, now you've got a different approach to actually contracting, and the contracting is once off. It's short term. It's not a long-term relationship. For a multinational, when you're outsourcing, it is a long-term relationship that you focus on. But for the small buyer, in our second paragraph, we actually talk about in this paper, well, we're actually focusing on small buyers, so they can't lawyer up, they don't have the xenophobic risk, remember in the first paragraph, but they have that problem of not being able to lawyer up, so now they just do short-term contracting instead, and that's how they approach. And then that becomes the setting of our study, and then the problem is that buyers will still get scammed by suppliers that can't lawyer up, and then we go into the problem of how then they can control against these supplier scams. Do they license better? Do they actually visit the factory? Do they have third-party auditing? Do they do more verification steps? So, and that's basically what the paper comes about. So as you can see, what I've taken you through is a story of the first page of this paper, but I haven't only been referring to the big problem of supplier scams. I've actually focused on some two big generic theories of make versus buy, make versus outsource. And that's what theory is about. Theory is to give you a leverage or a platform to just start on to build your own story for the context that you are researching. Then that theory allows you at the end of your research to come back and say, look, this is what I found about this make versus buy problem in my data that I've researched, and this is how it contributes to the general story of the make versus buy theory that is in the literature. And that's what theory is about. A theory is a starting point where you actually use it to launch your research, and it's an end point where you bring your research contribution home and show to the literature, to your peers, how you're contributing to that theory. So that's what theory is about. Theory helps you. It doesn't actually create more problems than what they're worth. So there you go. This is O'Connor, Monash Business School, talking about theory. Bye for now.